All right. Well, hey, tell me about your Gamergate experience.
Well, my Gamergate experience was mostly on KotakuInAction. It still is. I've never really liked the chans and things like that. They have their place, but that's sort of just, sling slurs and vulgarities at each other, and everyone is completely anonymous, and all that is just not for me. So I mostly stayed on KIA, where things were kept a little more reasonable. And it was a good community. It's still a good community. I just wish that the moderators allowed a more open range of topics. I was a moderator there for a while. I ended up getting in an argument with other moderators over exactly that, what was allowed to be posted on the subreddit, and that was how I ended up losing my modship, but, these things come and go.
What kind of posts do you want to post on KotakuInAction that you can't today?
Well, more general sort of wokeness in media type stuff. They have this rule that it's only allowed if it directly pertains to nerd culture, but I think the problem has metastasized beyond that. Like, we should be allowed to talk about the same problems with things like woke casting and anti-fan baiting narratives and stuff like the Little Mermaid movie as in a Marvel movie. I think that that's an artificial limit they impose, which really hurts our ability to be effective advocates.
What is wokeness?
That's a very commonly asked question. The definition that I give is that wokeness is Marxism repurposed to be about identity instead of class. It's taking the ideas of class struggle and oppressor versus oppressed class binaries that is core to Marxism, but instead of making it about economics, it becomes about immutable identity characteristics, race, sex, orientation, gender identity, things like that, which are outside of people's control, unlike being rich, where you at least theoretically can give your money away.
I'm not sure a lot of people would agree that being rich or poor is entirely within one's control.
While being rich is within one's control, you can't help being poor, but if you're rich, you can choose to give your money to charity.
Why is wokeness bad?
Because it's entirely group identity-based politics that leaves no room for individuality. For example, I think most reasonable people would agree that as a statistical average, you're going to have an easier time in America if you're white than if you're black. But there are always exceptions to the rule. For example, Eminem, the rapper, grew up a poor white kid in a very black area, and he faced a lot of discrimination from black people. He recounts stories of having been beaten up as a child because of his race. Now, his story may not be the most common story of racism in America, but it's real. It happened. It is a valid form of discrimination, and it sucks to have been in his situation, and I'm happy for him that he made good as an adult. But wokeness doesn't allow for those kinds of nuances. If you are born as part of the oppressor class in some way because you're white or because you're male or what have you, then there is a preset narrative about what you are like, what your life and your experiences will be like, and it essentially says that everything was handed to you, you didn't earn anything, and wherever you got on the backs of less privileged people. And there's definitely people for whom that is true, but it's not a fair generalization. And that's what wokeness or social justice or any number of other names people have for the same philosophy is fundamentally about. These generalized group-based narratives about the relationships between different identity categories of people. And I find those disturbingly reductive, often mean-spirited, and absolutely riddled with hypocrisies and double standards. And that's what I think is just a generally bad idea about that philosophy.
So you want to criticize what you perceive as being wokeness in video games and other media. What does that look like?
Well, mostly, for me personally, it looks like pointing out how unacceptable most of what they do would be if they were doing it to anybody else. For example, let's look at many of the narratives that woke media companies spin when fans complain that we're toxic and entitled and bigoted and what have you, because we don't like it when they take a property that previously was targeted at our demographics and instead retool it to be targeted at a different demographic. Let's imagine instead that were happening with something like Twilight or what have you, with properties traditionally targeted at women. That suddenly some company decided they wanted to court a more male audience. So they retool the IP and they take out a lot of the stuff that women enjoy about it, and they make it all action and blood and guns and boobs. And the original female audience complains about that, and the company just goes, oh, well, you're just a bunch of man-hating rad femmes. You stupid bitches. That would be seen as horrible behavior by that corporation, and rightly so. It would be considered bigoted. It would be considered ungrateful to their longtime customers. It would be considered general corporate scumbaggery. But when it's being done to a male audience, suddenly that's okay and it's noble and it's woke.
I mean, what does this look like, though, in practice? Like,
you mean in terms of activist tactics?
Well, in terms of, like, you mentioned The Little Mermaid. They make The Little Mermaid black. Can't you just not watch the movie? You don't like it?
Well, yes, but when a whole bunch of people decide together to not watch the movie and advocate not watching the movie, that becomes a boycott.
Do you consider yourself boycotting these woke products?
A great many of them, yes.
Is that very different from social justice people boycotting the Batgirl cover that you got involved with Gamergate to stop?
Well, I think that there are two core differences. First of all, a lot of the social justice arguments rely on moral castigation of the media based on claims that it causes real-world harm, claims they can't prove, and that likely aren't true, that things they consider sexist in media cause the objectification of women, that they influence men's real-world attitudes towards women in negative ways, and that they give female viewers all sorts of body image issues and internalized misogyny and all sorts of other psychological problems. It's not very different in spirit from the claims of someone like Jack Thompson or Friedrich Wertham, who blamed, say, video games for causing crime, or blamed comic books for causing juvenile delinquency. There have been decades of research into these kinds of media effects, which have fairly consistently found that they don't exist, at least not in any sort of reliable monkey see, monkey do type way. And yet the claims persist. That's intellectually dishonest. And it matters if the arguments you're using to try to persuade someone are true or not. Secondly, I am a big believer in the general application of the principle of self-defense. I.e., if someone comes at you with a knife and you shoot them, that's not murder. And society's general prohibition on killing doesn't apply to it because they did it first and you were just protecting yourself. Likewise, that applies to many things in these kinds of debates, to issues of censorship and things like that. If somebody tries to deplatform or smear you first and you hit back against them, you're not the bad guy. You're just defending yourself. The social justice warriors have spent 10 years screaming at these companies and lambasting them with press narratives and using often things like unfounded allegations of sexual misconduct as bullying tactics to try to compel these companies to make media their way and bend them to their will. And eventually, they succeeded. The media studios stopped making the kinds of media that people like us like, and they started making media that is carefully calculated not to piss off the social justice warriors. But whether it pisses us off, they couldn't care less. So, in turn, we are striking back. We're not starting it, and we would be perfectly content to agree to any sort of mutual disarmament treaty with the social justice warriors wherein both sides agree to stop using these tactics. But as long as they're coming at us with this stuff, we really don't have much choice but to hit back.
So I want to touch upon a couple things. It's okay when we do it, essentially. Like it's so these things that the social justice people do are bad. You joined an entire movement to stop them from doing some things, but now you just want to do the same thing back to them.
I wouldn't put it that way, obviously. My construction of it would be that the rules are the rules. If one side is allowed to do it, and has been consistently getting away with it for 10 years, then they can't really complain if it's done back to them. The golden rule: do unto others as you would have others do unto you. They've been doing unto us, so in what position are they to complain when they're hit back?
Who's they?
The social justice warriors. Now, obviously, I fully concede these are very loose political factions, and it can be difficult to place a specific person, especially when they're unwilling to place themselves. I don't advocate being a douche to particular individuals over this stuff. But these major media corporations, they've really made their bed with their marketing narratives.
A lot of what you talk about sounds like criticism. They're writing these articles that are saying these games are sexist, we don't like these games, and this is, in your eyes, bad because it makes developers less likely to make games with sexy characters in them or other types of content that you like. But some of that just sounds like criticism. Like if a developer takes that feedback and is like, you know what, actually, I do think that was kind of sexist. Let's take that out of the game. What's wrong with that?
Some of it is. Some of it is. But, like I said, a lot of their claims are based in spurious science. If you tell somebody that the media that they're creating is hurting people in real life, physically hurting them in some way, or causing other people to hurt them, and that isn't true, then you're just emotionally blackmailing the developer to give you your way. There's also the issue of cancel culture, wherein when people don't give these activists their way, the activists often start campaigns to get them personally fired from their jobs, or otherwise make them radioactive to associate with, to ruin their reputations. Sometimes this goes as far as finding people who will make false accusations against such a person to try to tar their reputation. And that's just over the line. I don't even think that kind of stuff is okay to do on the basis of, well, we were provoked, so gloves are off. There have to be some limit.
You say not in a monkey see, monkey do way, and I think that you're right. The studies do show that there's no reason to think that video games do cause people to become violent, and there have been some studies that show that video games don't cause people to be sexist. But if we want to steelman their argument, wouldn't some of these people say that if you consume large amounts of media that portray, let's say, women in a certain way, then that could, at least in theory, change the perceptions unconsciously of the person playing the games to make them view women in a more negative light, potentially?
In theory, maybe. But I don't think theory is good enough. You have to have some actual evidence to support that theory. And most studies have found that there isn't a practical real-world effect to this kind of media consumption. In the few that have, what that effect is not reliable. For example, they did a study on the news, which led to the creation of cultivation theory. Now, the news is different from fiction, because the news claims to be real. And what they found was that watching a lot of violent, scary events depicted on the news doesn't cause a person to become violent themselves. It causes them to become afraid that others may do violence to them. It's not the result that the activists claim it is, where people just imitate it. That's what I mean by it's not monkey see, monkey do. Sometimes it has some sort of effect, but the effect is something pretty out of left field that is unrelated to or even contrary to what the activists are claiming it does. For example, there was one study wherein, looking at some of these sexy female characters in video games, seemed to have positive body confidence effects for female viewers, which is opposite what the activists claimed it would do. Now, as far as I know, that study has never been replicated. It may be an outlier and its results are not reliable, but it kind of goes to my point that what people take away from these games, if they take anything away, is all over the map. And it may have more to do with what you bring into it controlling what you get out of it, rather than the content of the game itself having a predictable psychological effect on the viewer.
You said you got involved with Gamergate to oppose censorship campaigns like the comic book change the cover campaign. But now you're talking about opposing wokeness generally. Do you distinguish between the two?
I do. Like I said, first of all, you shouldn't make spurious claims of harm. I think that really is a line between criticism and censorship. If you accusing and claiming that what you're criticizing has negative effects that it doesn't, or that there's no evidence that it does, you've crossed the line from merely criticizing it to trying to censor it. And the same is true of the cancel culture stuff. You're not just criticizing then. You're not trying to win the argument about whether it's good or bad. You're trying to silence the opposition. You're trying to bully people, to make them give you your way out of fear, not because you've persuaded them. We good?
Yeah, you did cut out slightly at the very start of that, but I can edit a little bit for the book, so it's fine. What was the very first thing you were saying when they start these it cut out like right before accusations?
When they start making accusations that are either outright false or that there's no proof of.
Okay, I think we're good.
Against the media that they're criticizing, that's where they cross a line from criticism into attempted censorship.
All right, so I know you've talked about this a little bit already, but why did you get involved with Gamergate? You mentioned that you saw these comic book censorship controversies.
Yes. I saw that. I saw, as you pointed out, the Lionhead Studios thing, and I wanted to do something about it. And there was only one movement that was really daring to stand up to the games press and the media smear machine and the social justice warriors who, I don't agree that Gamergate was the first battle of the culture war, but it was the first battle they didn't steamroll. And if somebody was standing up against that, I wanted to be part of it.